Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our publishing and coaching services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we're being joined by Loren Stephens, author of Paris Nights. Loren, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Paul. I'm delighted to be with you today and with your listeners, and hopefully I can give them some useful information.
I am looking forward to it. Are you ready to get started?
Sure.
All right, question number one. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
My most important piece of advice that I can give to any writer is that they feel passionately about the subject that they're exploring, whether it's nonfiction or fiction. It's a long process, and if this is not something that they are fascinated by, that they have questions about, which can often be answered through the writing process, then don't start. But if there is something that really grabs them, my advice is absolutely go for it. Everyone has the right to write.
Absolutely, and it makes such a difference. Is it something that you're passionate about, something that you love? It just flows. I've done 13 of my own books, and I've been very fortunate to be passionate about each and every one of them. And when you're passionate about it, it just flows so much easier.
At least the first draft.
Absolutely.
Then it's blood, sweat, and tears, right?
Oh, yeah, and that actually transitions perfectly into our next question, and that is, what do you feel is the hardest part about getting published?
Let's say you finished your book. You have a completed manuscript. You're happy with it. You've shared it with your nearest and dearest, with people that you really trust, and people who are going to give you an honest assessment of your book. Not your best friend who doesn't want to hurt your feelings. And you've done the best possible job that you can. Then comes the next step, which is finding a publisher. And what is so marvelous about the world of publishing today is that there are so many different ways to get published. There are the traditional legacy publishers. Those are the top 5 major household names: Random House, Farrar, Giroux, Houghton Mifflin, and so on. There are the boutique publishers who specialize in certain types of books, whether they're fiction or nonfiction. There are hybrid publishers where you become a partner with a publisher. And then there is the world of on-demand publishing, where you control everything. You decide how many copies you want to sell at any one time. And any one of these routes are legitimate. And just for an example, the book The Martian by Andy Weir, which found its way into a major motion picture and a national bestseller, started off as a self-published book.
Yep.
The same thing was true of a book called The Shack, which is an inspirational, spiritual book. So if you have the commitment to the work that you're doing, you will find a way to get your book published.
Yeah, and with The Martian, that was one of the books that really inspired me, because it ended up becoming one of my favorite movies, and I was like, wow, this actually started as a self-published book, and it really does show the lines with that, with traditional and self-publishing. The main thing is, if you've got a story to tell, just get out there and tell it.
Right, and many of the big publishing companies watch what happens on Amazon or Barnes & Noble. They look at the algorithms. They look to see what books are moving. so that even if you have a self-published book, if you get across a certain number, they start paying attention to you, and before you know it, they're picking up the phone and calling you. And it could be that very same publisher who initially turned down your manuscript for one of a million reasons. We have another book that looks like this one. We had a book last year that didn't do well. You don't have a big enough author platform. I mean, I could give you all the reasons why publishers say no. But the key for any author is don't take no for an answer. One door closes and another door opens. And that's been my philosophy in every endeavor that I've ever followed, whether it was making documentary films, producing theater for Broadway and off-Broadway, being in the mortgage banking business. I have a little bit of ADD, so I've done a whole bunch of things in my life. And I think the thing that has really helped me be successful is always look for another way. If something doesn't work, don't think that that's the answer. Just find another way.
Absolutely. Yeah, I went from a school teacher to a publisher, so it's just funny where life takes you. There's so many different little journeys out there.
Right, and you just have to be open to the opportunity. I had a friend who was a pretty well-known writer, and I don't know if you agree with this theory. She said the story finds you.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, if you stay open to the world, you have a curious mind, things are going to come your way, and it's almost like you get chosen to tell that story. And really, that's the most magical part of all.
Yeah, that's actually how I became a publisher, because after my third book, I had people sort of reach out to me going, hey, can you help us with getting published? And it's something I never thought about, but I saw that opening, and I was like, okay, let's do it. And it really was a life changer. So you really do just have to be open to see what's out there.
Well, one of the quotes that I love, and I know you'll ask me for a writing quote, but one of the general quotes that I love, which I followed in the business world, is find a need and fill it. And clearly, that's what happened to you.
Yep.
Someone articulated to you that there was a need for assistance with publishing, and you were perfectly positioned to help respond to that need. And now you have a great business.
Well, and I believe the same thing happened to you too, right? With ghostwriting.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I didn't set out to be a ghostwriter, Paul.
Yep.
I barely even knew what it was. But I wanted to write my mother's life story while I was still in the business world. And so I did. I wrote her memoir. It took us about 3 years. And once I completed it and saw the kind of response that it received from friends and family and, nearest and dearest, I thought, this could be a business, And again, it's keeping your mind open to possibilities, and that's what happened. So now, 25 books later, I'm busier than ever. But I didn't ever imagine that would be where my life would end up.
Life is a funny thing, and my goodness, 25 books you've written?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Over how many years, if you don't mind me asking?
10 years. And
Wow.
I have a team that works with me. If there's a book that is a real specially technical book, I may turn to one of my team to help with it or to take it over. Of course, I disclose that to our writer clients at the outset so that they understand that they're getting two for the price of one, as it were.
Yeah, I think that's really key is just making sure that you make it very clear to the client exactly what to expect. 'Cause we do that with our done for you publishing services and our marketing services. We actually lay out everything in the blueprint with what, okay, from this step, we're going to do this, this, and this. These are the updates. This is communication. Because I really feel that connects with your core values. And ours is truth and service, where we are always upfront and we're always very clear, but we also want to make sure that that customer satisfaction is a number one thing. And it sounds like you're doing the exact same thing.
Right. Well, the worst thing to do is to surprise your client in a negative way,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So from the first interview, just to sort of meet and greet, if I've assessed through a quick telephone call that there's someone on my team that is better suited to this particular project, I bring them to the initial meeting and they make the decision of whether they want to go with both of us or, you know, to go with someone else, which is always their prerogative. But hopefully they'll like what we have to say and that each of us brings something special to the table.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk a little bit about marketing. So please share a marketing strategy that you have used in your book launch that worked well.
I'll speak about a book that was just completed by one of my author clients. In the world of ghostwriting, the client is called the author because it's their story, and the ghostwriter is called the writer because they're the one that's actually sort of, you know, doing the heavy lifting, making the story come to life, and bringing the author's voice onto the page. And one of my authors, who happens to be the CEO of a major U.S. company, and is a brilliant marketer himself and a brilliant businessman, marketed his book through something that I think is totally brilliant, and many people can take a page from his book. The book is about Vienna and Shanghai during World War II and the Holocaust and an interracial marriage. And what he did was he approached a nonprofit company, a nonprofit organization that specializes in promoting diversity. And the book launch was for the benefit of the organization. And the opening night tickets were sold, which included a copy of the book, and 300 people came to the opening. You can't do that with a book launch at a bookstore. I've never heard of anyone doing it except maybe John Grisham, possibly, or Joel Gray, who did it out here in Los Angeles, which is where I'm based. At our little local bookstore, Diesel, there was a line around the block. But there aren't too many authors, writer-authors, who have that kind of clout to make that happen, especially if you're a first-time author, first-time writer, whose world is the world of business. It's not the world of publishing a book. So to find an organization that is in some way connected to the theme of your book, that can be tremendously helpful, because not only do you invite people who you know in your, you know, sphere of influence, but the organization also does it, and it's a win-win for everybody. Another example of that is a very close friend of mine who's in my writing group. I've been in a writing group for 10 years, and for your writer listeners, there's nothing better than having a group of 3 or 4 writers who meet once a month, and everybody holds each other accountable. This particular book is about brain injury. The title of the book is Wherever You Are. It's by my friend Cynthia Lim. Shout out to her. And she is working with organizations that deal with how to find good care for people with severe chronic illnesses. This is such a critically important area. How do you kind of navigate through the system? How do you find help and advice And she's using that as a platform to sell her book and talk about her book, and meet with people who are personally interested in this whole area. Her book happens to be a memoir, but she brings to the table a huge amount of information based on her own personal journey of helping her husband. So that's my tip in terms of marketing, is to find an organization that somehow is related to the kind of book, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, that you as an author are writing about, and leverage that relationship.
Yeah, that is great advice, especially if you can get the right fit, because they're going to be more than happy to promote you, especially when they find that right fit in a relationship.
Absolutely.
Well, let's talk about your favorite book. So what is your favorite book, and what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
Well, I have to say I read about 100 books a year, which is a lot of books. And some wonderful writers say you should, as a writer, you should spend half your time writing and half your time reading. And I kind of subscribe to that theory. And usually my favorite book, if I'm lucky, is the one that I've just finished reading, because I read so much. So I'll give you a book that I think is fantastic, and I think so for a number of reasons. Dr. Daniel Mason's new book, The Winter Soldier, which is a historical novel based in World War I, and the main character is a medic who is studying to be a neurosurgeon, and he ends up in a tiny hospital in the middle of nowhere, and has to sort of learn on the job. And there's a nun in this little godforsaken hospital who basically teaches him his craft, and they enter into a relationship. Daniel's prior book, which came out, I think, 10 years ago, was called The Piano Tuner. So his world is historical novels, basically. And the thing that I found so fascinating is his ability to create a huge historical tableau, and give you an enormous amount of information about the state of medicine in the early 1900s, which frankly I don't think an author who does not have his background, he's an MD psychiatrist at Stanford University, so he's a fully trained practicing psychiatrist and has years and years of knowledge behind him. But what's great is that you never lose sight of the love affair, because that is the heart of the book. And yet you get all of this other information swirling around that you can take from it. And my favorite kind of books that I write, and I'm finishing one right now, are historical novels, where you set your characters in a very complicated tableau, and you try to figure out the telling details that are going to give the reader just enough information they feel like they're there, that they're part of the story. Another fantastic example of that was Gentleman in Moscow, Amor Towles' book, which takes place in the 1930s. He's under house arrest at the Hotel Metropole in Moscow, and the end of that book is one of the most incredible endings. I don't know how he pulled it off, but he did, and I'm a tremendous fan of his work. I've met him. I became a fan when he wrote his first book called The Rules of Civility while he was still an investment banker. Don't ask me how he made that transition, but he did. But the thing that I can say that I've learned is finding that balance between the history of a period and then the personal story, because in the end, you're not writing a history book, you're writing a novel. And if you can't find the heart of your story and something that really grabs your reader and makes them want to turn the page and find out what's going to happen to your main characters, all the research that you've done is really for naught. So kind of that's the lesson that was my takeaway.
And for a final question, what is your favorite quote and why?
Okay, so I prepared for this. My favorite quote is, "All sorrows can be borne if you put them into a story or tell a story about them." And the quotation is credited to two women, Hannah Arendt and Isaac Dinesen, who is Dame Karen Blixen. And I think that the notion that somehow by telling your story, you give it loses its power over you, no matter how sad, no matter how tragic. If you can keep telling it, keep writing it, shape it, find a perspective in it, it will somehow not be as great a tragedy as it initially seems. And that has become the title of my new novel, which is based on my husband's Japanese family. And the title of the book is All Sorrows Can Be Borne, and it will come out in 2019.
Well, Loren, I want to thank you for being a guest on this show. What is the best way for people to find you online?
Online is through my website, Write Wisdom, WRITE Wisdom, WISDOM.com, one word. And I will also say, and you may cringe, but I also have telephone numbers listed, and I'm happy to talk to people because I always believe if I help someone, it'll come back to me. So if someone has a question that they'd like to ask me, or a piece of advice, or, how do I get started, I'm happy to talk to them.
No, that's great. I love the fact that you've got your phone number on there. I'm a big karma guy myself, so I'm really glad that you offer that. Well, Loren, I want to thank you once again for being on the show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
Thank you so much, Paul. It was delightful to be with you.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how to get your book published with a proven system that works, grab a free copy of my book at getpublishedpodcast.com.